Hello everyone, today I want to look at the Nioh closed beta. Some say it's a mix between Ninja Gaiden and Dark Souls. I'd say that's somewhat true, but let's go into further detail and see what this beta is all about, and what we can expect to see in the main game. The developers are really smart. The betas for this game are actually only available for 24 hours at a time, so you get a massive amount of people playing it at once. Since the game has online features that you can try out, this is actually a very good thing. It'll vary a little bit based on where you live, but most of the times, it's not difficult to find other players online. This series is comparable to the Dark Souls franchise in the sense that if you die, you lose unbanked experience points. You have a stamina bar that you can deplete each time you make an attack. And you have the typical stats that you see in an action RPG, like health, stamina, strength, dexterity, and such. The similarities end there. Nioh has a very complex battle system in terms of equipment and the item system. There are tons of menus with a lot of customization features. There are many different types of weapons you can use, and there are armors of many varying kinds of weights, such as light, medium, and heavy armor styles. More weight means more defense, but slower dodges, for example. This game will be mission-based, and it's not like Dark Souls where you get a world to explore continuously. Unfortunately, having mission-based system will decrease your immersion into the game a bit. Instead of seeing the levels within a continuous world, you'll only see a bunch of zones that you have to teleport between. This game has a very big loot system. Getting loot in this game isn't like Dark Souls, actually. You can actually get weapons and armors from many types of regular enemies. Sometimes, though, you can actually get rarer versions of weapons and armors from the enemies too. That means you can get an enemy to drop an upgraded version of the weapon, which is something you wouldn't really see in Dark Souls. Instead, here, they don't emphasize you holding onto a weapon throughout the game. It looks like you can keep defeating enemies as well, and get rare items from that. So in this game, instead of bonfires, you have shrines, which allow you to respawn your character. So depending on which shrine you prayed at last, this will determine where your character respawns when you die. In addition, you have to find some lost little magical creatures and tell them to go back to the shrine, and by doing that, you'll be able to find and use more elixirs on your character, the main healing item in the game. So you have a base amount of elixirs that you have when you rest at shrines, but as you tell these little guys to go back, you can get more and more elixirs each time you rest at the shrine. You can also get elixirs from defeating enemies as well as a random drop. So when you actually look at it, this healing system is actually a combination of both Dark Souls and Bloodborne. If you end up getting a lot of healing items from the enemies as drops, that's a good thing. But if you don't, if you're unlucky and you don't get healing items as drops, you can still rest and get a minimum amount of elixirs. Let's say you use up all of your elixirs at once. That means that you can actually just rest at pray at the shrine, and then you can get the base amount, which is determinant on how many of the little magical creatures you find. That's actually a very good way of thinking. It combines elements from both of those games into this one. Gameplay-wise, you can defeat all of the enemies and bosses at level 1, but for most players, that's not really feasible. It's a really tough game, and there's no, as far as from the beta, there's no difficulty switch you can change. The difficulty really depends on what mission you're trying to do. Some missions seem to be more harder than other ones, and the missions have rankings before you go in them. But even so, it looks like that the main missions you provided to complete in the demo is actually pretty difficult. I'd say it's easily more difficult than Dark Souls or even Demon Souls. It's definitely not the toughest game, especially when you look at the other console generations. But it's still gonna be a tough game, especially for someone who's new to this kind of gameplay. For example, the regular boss in the main mission of the beta can easily two-shot any character. And unless you spent hours trying to grind levels to increase your character's health, you might have a very rough time with it. The boss even has a swiping attack that can easily stun-lock you, such that you can't move, and it can easily kill your character within one string of attacks put together. If the missions in the main game are similar to the difficulty from the beta, you would actually have a very rough time. I'm not the most experienced player, but I have played Demon Souls, Dark Souls, and Bloodborne, and I've actually played those games with not too much difficulty, but this game actually has a lot of tricky little mechanics. So that's just one of the bosses you see in the demo, but the demo also includes another optional mission, which actually has a optional swordsman boss. And there's also a Twilight version of the level provided in the demo. The Twilight version is just a much harder version of the level in the demo. The Twilight enemies, unless you grind your character and get massive amounts of experience and level up your character a lot, you're gonna have a very, very rough time. The swordsman in the demo, for example, can easily one-shot or two-shot most of the players playing the beta. Even the Twilight version of the level, it's so difficult. The first enemy can easily kill your character within just a couple of shots again. When I tried to tackle the optional swordsman boss myself, I was at the recommended level, about 12 or so, but I was still getting death within just a hit or two. It's very, very difficult. Depending on how the actual game decides to separate main storyline missions from the optional content, this game can either be a little bit of a challenge to very challenging. I would expect that if you decide to pursue all of the optional content, this game will have a lot of challenge for you, but which will be good for the players who want to seek that kind of challenge. You wouldn't really find it in any other game in this generation. What really matters in this game is if they make it fair. And it is fair in the sense that you don't have lives in these games anymore. You'll never encounter an actual game over screen. Instead, you just need to spend time, and you might die and lose a bunch of experience, but you'll have to spend some time to get that back. And it's really just spending time to get good with the combat system. In my opinion, I think that the combat system in this game is overly complicated. If you can take advantage of it, you can actually get through the beta more easily. There was one individual who's actually able to buff their character and then use a special move that can disarm one of the main antagonists. He actually disarmed the optional swordsman boss, and he was able to use the boss's own weapon against them to eliminate the optional boss in just one hit. It's not just about grinding. If you're really smart, and if you actually go online and read a lot of the in-depth mechanics of the battle system, if you can understand all of the nuisances contained within, you can actually get really smart, and you can actually cheat the game system, but it takes a lot of work. Otherwise, the aesthetics and style of the game is very interesting. You actually do get to immerse yourself in a lot of Japanese culture. Kind of like the Yakuza games, all of the lines of dialogue in this game are in Japanese, so you actually provided subtitles so that you can understand the characters. The level design contained in the mission in the beta is interesting, but from this mission, it feels like there's a bit too many corridors. You don't actually see that many open areas. I'd actually say it's a step down from a title like Bloodborne or Dark Souls 3, which had many open areas. The level design is not bad per se, but I feel like it's not on the same tier as those games, at least judging from the mission in the beta. In terms of the online content, there's an option to invite a player to go through missions with you, using in-game tokens. And basically these in-game tokens, they're cup items that you see in the levels, and you have to share a cup with a buddy to invite them to your game. So even if a player finds a mission too difficult, they can always receive help, kind of like what you'd see in the same Dark Souls franchise. You can invite a buddy to help you if you're struggling. You might, I'm not sure, I have to look into it if you're able to grind them from enemies, but you can't waste them needlessly. So it's trying to say that you have to kind of try the content yourself, but if you're really struggling, then you can spend the cup to get a friend to help you. I think that in today's era, it's always fun to see a new IP being released. A lot of game development studios are afraid of creating new entities because of the high development costs that you see in today's console generation. With franchises like Onimusha and Ninja Gaiden being dead for so many years, it's quite nice to see a Japanese-themed hack-and-slash action game. I'm really looking forward to it. It's not the biggest budgeted game out there, and it may possibly be a game that gets very grindy. And I'm not a fan of splitting the game up into missions. I still feel like this is a title that tries to do something original by combining various elements from other existing game franchises. And from the viewpoint of playing the beta, I say that it's original enough to warrant a playthrough. And I'm actually going to consider buying this game for myself when it's released. Please consider liking our video and consider subscribing to our channel if you found the content to be useful. Keep checking our channel as well, so that you can see our full review of the game after it's released.